We are in a sort of a conundrum and dilemma about the direction governments and people are taking in regards to the battle against climate change. It seems to be a very narrow, seems to me anyway, a very narrow view of the ecological challenges that the planet faces and humanity faces. That is ignored. Most of the argument about ecological sustainability seems to be ignored, especially when it comes to giant corporations who do what we call monocultural farming on a broad scale, which then it may damage the ecosystem and the soil structure permanently, as it did in America in the 1930s when everyone moved over into wherever it was. And excuse my ignorance in regards to when it was, and the farms soon depleted all the soils, and it caused a big drought come along, or winds, and it eroded all those people's capacity to make a living out of the land. This is my great concern about massive scale broadacre farming that's going and being developed in places like India and other places, when there needs to be another look at the ecological values of sustainable permaculture farming in regards to that part of the ecological equation. What is sustainable in regards to farming itself, rather than what is just profitable for giant corporations, who are also at the same time financing this takeover of this land by the use of technology, which is involved with the reduction of CO2. So it's a sort of a loop, as a cycle, a monopoly cycle created within the corporations that profits them, but may, and regardless how much noise is made about climate change, the question is there damage to humanity and damage to what you call people's traditional farming methods and their own personal economy, the economy what sustains villages and towns for thousands or hundreds of years? Is there a bit of a dichotomy or sort of a contradiction in the terms we are concerned climate change was a big moral dilemma, we're concerned about the future and the future of the planet and the future of humanity, and yet at the same time we're contradicting that. That is being contradicted by the destruction of ancient traditional farming methods, which they might, of course, they're regulated by climate, by the natural climate cycle, the seasonal cycles, the monsoon cycles, etc., etc. If the monsoon fails, the crops fail, etc., etc. We know that. So it seems to me that there's two arguments in regards to farming. There's people in cities who need to be fed, because there's millions of people who live in cities. But there's also people all over the world living in small villages, and it seems that allows them to have another look at agriculture or the growing of food, for instance, so that it can be done in two ways, in two distinct methods, and because it's very, very important from an evolutionist perspective, a natural perspective, to preserve what has worked for thousands of years in some cases, in some traditions, and sustain that, rather than eliminate all that, the village agriculture, if you like, that traditional agriculture people use, say, in India. What they should be doing, some of this money and profit made out from the corporations, shouldn't be just selfishly ploughed into more profit for themselves. Some of it should be given over, if we're interested in climate change and not just profit, to these villagers, to allow them to look at systems that improve the durability and sustainability of their traditional farming in a way that also sustains a crop yield over time. And that would then creates more employment, because employment isn't all about eliminating, or profits can't all be about eliminating the need for humanity, because then and to be employed, when that's not necessary, because people want their traditional lifestyle. Someone from America involved in another country's farming, someone from America who has a different mentality altogether, cultural mentality altogether, compared to people in other more traditional countries who still have traditional lifestyles, and that is their culture. And it seems to a lack of respect. We're supposed to have a cultural diversity, respect for cultures. At the same time, the same people who are promoting all of this do not respect the traditional cultures of others, whose farms are being eliminated and taken over by monoculture, which may well damage the soils over at any time. Because if climate change means the weather becomes unpredictable, then why would you risk creating a monocultural system, which means you may have destroyed the soils if there's a few years of drought, when you could have a look at sustaining smaller systems, what are more intensive farming, using water, recycling water, or in particular using wind and solar, because I'm all for wind and solar. Wind and solar, the best use of wind and solar is to take water out of the air where it's possible, recycle wastewater, and then move it to places where it can be used for irrigation. And you can stockpile this water. You can stockpile the water you take out of the air by putting it in reservoirs, and that gives you a quantifiable amount of food over a period of time. You can basically work that out if you know the average humidity or the agronomy in the area. So the actual humidity in the air tells you what the potential that is over a period of time. What you can, if you can sustain farming, permaculture and traditional farming in a more sustainable way, because that permaculture and that traditional farming respects the land. It doesn't just respect the profit, it's about respecting the land. Unless the land is respected, then anything to do with climate change or the political and corporate and the UN approach to climate change is basically a very narrow way of dealing with climate change. Because if you're going to risk destroying the actual soil structure by monocultural farming, which has been done many times in the past, the Romans have done it, the Americans have done it, Australians have done it. Everyone's done the same mistake with mass intensive farming on poor and fragile soils. So there needs to be another way of looking at growing food. Some of it should be grown organically, because that's very, very important, and it gives people that free choice, and it also allows to create employment in that. And it already does employ people intensely. So unless employment of people is not seen as part of the climate change agenda, the creation of employment in regards to this, creating sustainable agriculture, horticulture and aquaculture that they're doing in China. The Chinese are very, very good at this, and they're sort of thinking about it and evolving their systems according to what they're learning about the mistakes they've made in the past, and when they've done pollutions and they've damaged their own ecology. The Chinese are actually taking stock in that. We don't seem to take much note and seem to ignore what we can learn from these people. Instead, we're sort of dominated in the West by a Western corporate system, which seems to be says one thing about climate and then contradicts itself by the way it does agriculture in such a very, very narrow-minded. The profit only matters regardless of the result. Maybe the destruction of jobs and ecology and sustainable ecological systems over a period that have been sustained over years and years. Oh, yes, you have droughts. Yes, you have floods. That's the natural cycle. But the thing is, with modern technology and modern understandings, those farms can be improved so they're more sustainable in their yield and more sustainable in the ecoculture, the ecology of the area, which has been created over hundreds of years through generations. All that wisdom and knowledge in regards to farming is being lost because the idea of someone over there wants to make more and more profits to themselves, because that seems to be all that's on their mind, rather than have a look at ecological sustainability, which ought to be the part and parcel of the climate change argument. The climate change argument cannot be we only worry about climate changing or going warmer. If we're not worried about the sustainability of the food supply, we're not really having a conversation at all. And the food supply depends upon the water supply. The sustainability of the water supply by modernising how that's done through taking the water from the air, which can be done to some degree depending on where you are in the world, that can then allow a formulation, an actual real equation that then allows you to modulate your water supply so you can sustain a more traditional farming methods that then employs people in the way they want to be rather than being dictated to in one country from some people in another country are only interested in profits and they don't really seem to have any real feeling for the land itself. Because unless we feel for the earth itself, we have no feelings for climate change at all. And feeling for the earth is what people traditionally have, and this is ignored by corporations and governments. They don't seem to have a feeling for the planet itself, regardless they make so much noise about climate, and they've been doing it for a long time. And yes, the climate is changing, but the point is we must adapt our farming methods according to the potential of losing the soil structures and according to the potential of sometime in the future, if climate's going to change, as I say it is, of having no food supply because of climate change. So unless you're putting in, and broad acre farming has no guarantees of that whatsoever, it makes profit for a while, as the Romans showed in North Africa, and Australia showed across its run the soils here, and in America they showed that it's all right for a while, and then it suddenly drops off and you don't make any profit, you got no food at all. And you've disrupted the ecological system. That cannot be repaired. You created a balanced ecology that sustained people for a long time with desert conditions. And that ought to be the number one consideration right now in the UN, not just going on about Australia not doing enough about climate, when Australia in particular, with 25 million people, the same as Mexico City or one large city in China, must, by the mass of its land, it's a massive country, it grows an awful lot of greenery here, or biomass, that then must be taken. We need to be quantified before the UN makes any more statements in regards to Australia. It needs to quantify, is Australia asked the question, this is scientific, so we know how to deal with it. Unless we ask scientific questions, rational questions, is Australia, or is it a biomass of Australia, or are we taking out the CO2 in the air, what Australia is producing? Because this is a very, very important question in regards to how do we think about climate change, how do we think about CO2, not just being people shouting from the UN when it seems to me they've never really considered the geographical and physical situation within any particular economy. It's all right, we are not doing enough about climate change. I totally agree, but they do what we would do about climate change in Australia. I've done in another video. We would use the wastewater from regional towns to create green belts, if you like, and that would take CO2 from the air. That would be my common sense, logical approach and rational approach, which then creates sustainable horticultural industries within regional towns, which doesn't waste any more water evaporating in the sun, and it's greening the place. And surely, if we're improving the land like that and taking in CO2 by recycling it into plants, which is then becomes food energy or energy for birds or energy for animal life, we're doing far more than just driving an EV, which has to be produced in somewhere else, which is using CO2 to make it. Thank you.